Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausam Pereira. A Maldives-initiated move to oppose Pakistan's rant against India at the recent Organization of Islamic Conference meet in the UN had other backers from within the body signaling India's growing stature in the Islamic world. Media reports suggested that Saudi Arabia and UAE, once traditional allies of Pakistan, backed the stand taken by Maldives, signifying expanding ties between Delhi and Riyadh and Abu Dhabi. Oman, India's oldest strategic partner in the Gulf region, is believed to have stated at the meet that the discourse is part of India's internal affairs. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze how Pakistan's anti-India stand was vetoed in the OIC. Joining me on the program today are Anil Trigunayat, former ambassador, Professor A.K. Pasha, Center for West Asian Studies, JNU, and Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. All right, Ambassador, let me begin the program with you first. Let's first try and analyze, of course, this whole situation that took place in the OIC. Pakistan has been at it for some time now to try and bring up, several issues taking place in India's, and trying to get and gather support. But the Islamic world has very clearly showed us that they stand with us and not with Pakistan.
Well, Frank, that is true to an extent. But as you know, that since 1964, when the OIC was founded in the first time and India had to be kept out, and our delegation was led by Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad. And because of the Pakistani objections, India could not attend as a member and their delegation returned. Since then, if you come to think of it, the Pakistan has made India bashing in its foreign policy domain as the main priority. And second priority, of course, is indulging in cross-border terrorism. Now, Pakistan has very well exposed itself as far as terrorism is concerned. So everybody knows about it. In the OIC, which is the only forum where we are not there, Pakistan has been consistently able to manage to issue statements against India, to counter India's narratives, to condemn India's actions, especially in Jammu and Kashmir. But there has been a certain change in the Middle East itself, which is what is being reflected in the OIC. If you remember last year, Sushma Swaraj was invited in the Foreign Ministers Forum of the OIC, which is a very important forum, to be the guest of honor. And the Pakistani foreign minister refused to attend that, and the Emiratis told them that, okay, it's your wish. If you don't want to join, then it's fine. So that was a snub to Pakistan. On the other hand, the Saudis also realize India's potential, and all these countries are going through reforms. They are looking for bigger markets, better markets, and they have understood that what is the importance of India for their own calculuses. And therefore, they all realize it. Maldives, which you remember, about until 2 years ago, China was playing a big card, has come back and is supportive of India because India has been supporting them like traditionally. So Maldives, I would have preferred Bangladesh and several other countries should have also come up. And this is what throughout we have been telling the countries in the Middle East and the members of the OIC when we talk bilaterally that we are not there. So if you say you are our great friends, you must stand up for us and counter the venomous narrative, which is that of generated by Pakistan. All the time, these countries' leaders used to tell us that, don't worry about it. It is just we have to have a consensus-driven thing, and so we just go along with it, but it doesn't mean anything. So India initially used to be very sensitive. But from 2013 onwards, we decided that we are going to junk it. We will not react, we will not bother about these statements that are coming forward. And this continues. I mean, despite the fact that in 2019, Sushma Swaraj went there, attended, there was a statement out of Riyadh from the Secretary General's office on Kashmir. And while we are talking on 19.5 meeting, which you referred to, where Saudi Arabia and even Malaysia played it down, which was like a separate Malaysia, Turkey, and all, they are trying to create another Islamic bloc. The fact remains is that they realize that there is no point making it a major agenda. Secondly, it was a meeting of the ambassadors, OIC ambassadors in the UN. It was not a proper foreign ministers meeting. So technically, they could not have issued a working committee or something like that, which Pakistan wanted. Basically, their ambassador has been trying to just find something to talk about in the international domain, which don't have anything today. So this is precisely the reason it didn't work out. But let me tell you that on 20th of May, we are talking of 19th and 20th of May, the Secretary General issued another statement on Jammu and Kashmir, again referring to the Article 370 and the changes in the demographic and all. So their tenor, as far as the organization is concerned, has not really changed that much. But the key drivers of the organization have realized India's potential and they continue to support India. Even Malaysia has mended ways ever since Mahathir Mohamad is gone. So gradually it's going to work out. And I think that they understand India's potential, India's importance, and the fact that India has 200 million Muslims and very successful, one of them.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about the two M's then. Alok Bansal, Maldives and Malaysia. Maldives, of course, first, it was the first country that, smelled or looked at this rant and immediately objected to it. And then Saudi Arabia and UAE and the others joined in. And Malaysia, like the ambassador just pointed out, has changed course, seems like, after taking a very aggressive stand against India in 2019, it's now taken a far more softer stand in 2020.
See, firstly, we need to understand that today's Malaysia is different from what it was last year, because we have a different government at the helm of affairs. See, Mahathir Mohamad always had a grand vision. He looked himself as a global statesman. He thought he could create another Islamic bloc and counter UAE and Saudi Arabia, who have traditionally led the OIC countries. So both Erdogan and Mahathir had a common ambition, and as a result you saw they're coming together and they wanted somebody like Pakistan to join them. So these three were trying to create upstage Saudis and UAE. But once the Saudis started cracking the whip, Pakistan, which is forever actually ready with a begging bowl and going to Saudis to get funds and economic swaps, had to fall in line. And Imran Khan, after initially saying that he will go to Kuala Lumpur, had to back down. So that is as far as Malaysia is concerned. The current Malaysian government is actually still in a little bit of a limbo because it doesn't have a clear-cut majority. There is always still a lot of turbulence going on in Malaysia, and the current leader has no such global ambition that Mahathir, please understand, was also 90 plus. So 90 plus, the leader is probably in his final hurrah. He wanted to actually project himself. So it was a personal agenda with Malaysia which was there. I think and any Malaysian sensible government would realize that it doesn't make sense to go against India, and India's credentials as far as its secularism is concerned, as far as its treatment of minorities is concerned, has always been impeccable. Malaysia, on the other hand, has a constitutional provision which actually discriminates against minorities. So for a country which already has a provision like this, it's far more difficult to be critical of somebody else actually, which they should have been. And what is even more important is that Maldives, where again the new government, ever since Yamin's government was voted out of power, has been strongly pro-India, and I think they have rightly said so. In fact, Maldives was in the forefront of countering Pakistan's thing, saying that you can't name a country, and in fact it's and then of course it went to UAE and other countries, where UAE said that unless of course all the foreign ministers of OIC countries ratify it, we cannot have a small working group that can be constitution. And similarly Saudi Arabia downplayed it. Oman said it's an internal affairs. So I think Pakistan's attempt at whipping up this sort of an anti-India emotion has grossly failed. And we need to understand that Imran Khan has become extremely vociferous ever since his enormous failure on the front of tackling COVID at home, because there is already a problem. He is one of the few leaders who did not want to have a lockdown, and the numbers were shooting up, and there was a huge conflict with the state government, where Sindh government had declared a lockdown. He says there will be no lockdown, and then he came out with a statement saying that it is the elite who want the lockdown despite not having imposed lockdown. So there has been a lot of problem and a lot of criticism of Imran Khan domestically. And Pakistan's favorite politics has been that whenever cornered domestically, try and divert attention externally. And that's what he has been trying to do. He's been trying to talk of Jammu and Kashmir. He's making statements that there'll be false flag operations. He's trying to speak at every forum about India, India, and India. This is primarily to divert the attention of his domestic audience away from his gross failure failures both on economic front as well as on COVID-19 front.
Okay, all right, Professor. Now this is where I'd like to bring you in and let's talk about West Asia. Because, UAE and Saudi Arabia have been traditional allies of Pakistan, but we've seen all that change. Despite what happened earlier in the month, with all the social media backlash that we saw, despite that, the UAE and the Saudi Arabia have come out and backed us. What does it say about our relationship?
It is significant in the context of what Saudi Arabia did in September, that is last year September, soon after we took the decision in August. Because Saudi Arabia, along with Turkey, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, and Niger, they had taken a position that this decision taken by the Indian government should be reversed and the rights of the Jammu and Kashmir people should be safeguarded and all. We must also keep in mind that these two countries were traditionally aligned with Pakistan, like Turkey was. But there has been warming up of relations with India for a variety of reasons, among which Iran is one of them. And then, the fatigue on the Palestine issue equally applies to the Kashmir issue. People and leaders, not only in these two countries, but also elsewhere in the OIC, have become tired of this Kashmir issue, coming up on and off and straining the bilateral relations for a long period of time. So I make a distinction as far as OIC is concerned into three parts. One is the declining Pakistani clout in the OIC, which is confined to a couple of states. Then majority who are in favor of what India and its friends are doing in the OIC. And the third one is, onlookers. They are not interested as much as other countries are. So, there is also this dichotomy between rulers who are seen as despots, autocrats, and military tin pot dictators, so on and so forth. So the social media wave which picked up in the Gulf has to be seen in the disconnect between the people and the rulers because of this Arab Spring and the unnecessary rhetoric on Iran, in which it has become very clear to the Gulf people that when the crunch comes, the US administration or any other Western powers are not willing to militarily confront Iran on a variety of issues, whether it is on the sea or on attack in Saudi Arabia and in Iraq or Yemen or so on and so forth. So in that way, there is this disconnect growing between the Gulf rulers or West Asian rulers and the people, because there was expectation after the Arab Spring that the human rights and freedom and participation for the people and dignity and economic problems, less of corruption, but that has largely evaded the Arab people. So this is seen as one of the issues where they can articulate, not so much because of the sympathy for the Kashmiris, but more against venting out their own feeling against their own rulers, who they see as following a dubious policy whenever it supports the side on India, on the Kashmir issue, and on other occasions, if they need Pakistan on Yemen or Syria, they hobnob with Pakistan, or with Israel whenever it helps them for security against Iran. They look towards Israel, or to have closer relations with disinterested United States in the Gulf. They think that only through Jerusalem or Tel Aviv they can improve relations with the United States. So you have various complications and conflicting pulls and pressures working within the West Asian countries, and in particular the widening Gulf between GCC and Iran. All of this is playing out, and we have to keep that dynamics also in perspective.
Okay, taking the discussion forward now, let's talk about another issue altogether, that of Turkey, Ambassador. Turkey has turned out to be a problematic, issue. In between, we seem to have mended ways, and there were high-level visits that were planned as well. But all of those had to be called out because of the kind of stand that Turkey took, and it continues to do that even now.
See, the Turkey has, especially Erdogan, they have these revival of or rejuvenation of the Ottomanic ambitions in the Middle East. They want to become a big leader, competing with Saudi Arabia, trying to displace it. And wherever they find a little possibility of exerting themselves, they are able to be there. And this is what precisely they did when there was a problem between Saudi Arabia and Qatar about the blockade. They immediately stationed their troops and got the advantage of being there. Now, this is, of course, the myopic views of the Gulf nations themselves. But at the same time, the Turkey, Iran, and Qatar, this excesses very well emerged there. And as a counterpoise to the one which Professor also mentioned between Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel. I mean, you know that there has been a lot of Israeli Prime Minister had gone to Oman and they conducted this deal of the century meeting in Bahrain, and there are the sports diplomacy that is going on, the GCC countries. So one is looking at a clear dynamic that is emerging there. Now, Turkey obviously is opposed to any greater influence by the Saudis. It provides it also as some kind of a pointer against the United States, because it can take on the United States in a symbolic manner quite well, even being a NATO member. Secondly, as you know that the Turkey has not been able to get into the European Union despite its best efforts for many years. So it sees playing a bigger role as a leader of the Islamic world. And that's where it comes into it. And they are a stronger country. Today, you see in Libya, they have virtually changed the course of the events there. So Turkey has become as far as India is concerned, you see that historically Turkey has been very close to Pakistan. And it's from not now, but it has been from the time of D8 and all that. And the Pakistani Prime Minister has also cast his complete lot with the Turks. As even there was some criticism of the Emiratis when they sent their first plane last week of relief supplies to Tel Aviv, if you remember. Now, it was in Pakistan that there were a lot of negative propaganda going on against that. So they have realized that the Gulf countries, and Imran Khan himself has said that they prefer the Indian wealth or Indian market opportunities over the Ummah. And so therefore, there is a clear thing one sees today that these kind of divisive groupings that are emerging, power packs emerging in the Middle East with a clear division under the leadership of Turkey for the moment. Like that is something one has to see, and which is happening. On the other hand, while the US is in the receding mode to a great extent, the Russians have been expanding their footprint, and Russians and Turkey are trying to work together in the Middle East, even though they have a lot of problems and they have their own divergent approaches. But in Syria, Russia is a major power, and so is in Libya. And so therefore, it is extremely important that in the Middle East here, also within the wider Middle East, you will see this kind of emergence of these groups which are happening. Now, they also acquire greater significance in the context of Sino-US conflict, because China is very much present in the Middle East. So today there are new scenarios that are emerging there, dynamic, and that gets reflected in the OIC also. India is seen to be a very big market, a rich market, a reliable country with a large Muslim population, and no Islamophobia as it is made out to be. I would only say that in some of our social media and some other these lumpen politicians must refrain from commenting in a way that they do on a certain culture and civilization.
Absolutely. So Captain Bansal, as far as this entire issue is concerned, this issue that the ambassador just raised, there are some sticking points really as far as our relationship with our friends in West Asia is concerned. How do we deal with that aspect? And, what should we do to ensure that such kind of small issues don't create any bilateral problems?
See, firstly, now West Asia is not a monolith. There are too many fissures within West Asia. We always had the traditional fissure between Saudi Arabia and the Sunni Sheikdoms versus Iran. And the only country which used to maintain its neutrality was Oman because of its Badi faith, because which is equidistant both from Sunnis as well as Shias. But with the rise of Turkey, and as Ambassador said, that Erdogan sees himself as an Ottoman emperor. So he is actually looking for a stake in what all the territories which were part of the Ottoman Empire. So he has a problem with Egypt. He is the only one in the entire Islamic world, or probably in the entire globe, who supported Morsi when he died and when his trial took place and all those things happened. He's been the only one who has been doing that. When Qatar was pressurized, he was there. It is Turkish army which is actually backing Qatar there. It has been trying to project itself as the preeminent power, because traditionally in the Islamic world, especially in West Asia, Egypt had the leadership position. But regrettably, for last few years, in fact for last few decades, there has been a terminal decline as far as Egypt is concerned. There has been, of course, political disturbances, Morsi and then Al-Sisi's takeover, and as a result, the present regime lacks complete legitimacy. On top of that, they have a huge economic crisis. The current regime is being bankrolled by Saudis, so that is actually keeping the regime propped up. And then, because Egypt is there and Egypt is backing Haftar in Libya, I think Turkey found a way again of being relevant. So they have jumped into the bandwagon of Libya, because at one stage it looked as if Haftar is about to take over Tripoli because his forces were just on the outskirts. But it is the Turkish intervention and with military aid, huge military aid, which has actually prevented eventual falling out of Tripoli to Haftar's forces. So Turkey has expanded its influence and it's interfering today all over. But having said that, his own position as far as Erdogan is concerned at home is precarious. He has lost Ankara, he has lost Istanbul as far as the mayoral elections are concerned, because in Turkey there is no federal structure, there are no provincial governments. So it's a unitary government. So the only other tier of government that you have is the local bodies, and that is where he has lost the two big cities. Istanbul, from where he rose, in fact both Istanbul and Ankara are lost by him. He is also trying to crack down on Kurds, and though he has mended fences with Russians. Please remember, there was a time when they shot down a Russian plane and there was huge anger within Russia, but he has managed to mend fences with Russia. But despite that, their approaches as far as Syria is concerned are quite different, because when Turkish forces infiltrate into Syria and capture territory under the garb of preventing terrorists, the Syrian government has not liked it and has said that this is a blatant interference, blatant aggression. And as a result, that is where the Syrian army has been moving forward, supported by Russians. And that is, again, I don't think so this bonhomie that we see between Turkey and Russia will last long, because firstly there are historical reasons. Historically, Turkey and Russia have always been loggers down. You can see from times immemorial. In fact, they had common. They have been clashing in Balkans. They have been clashing in Crimea. They have been clashing all over. So that's historical thing, and that will, I think, continue. And that is where I think we need to wait it out. I don't think so any overtures to Erdogan will mend things. You will see some changes, like it happened in Malaysia. See, at one stage you thought that there was a powerful trinity emerging, but Malaysia has now become much more sensible, because they realize that it doesn't serve this sort of grandiose posturing, doesn't help Malaysia in the long term. And as a result, Malaysians have pulled out. So as far as we are concerned, our relations are good. What is significant is that our relations, good relations with UAE and Saudi Arabia, have not affected our relations with Iran. We still maintain a fairly decent relations, because in this particular Pakistan's attempt, you did not see any adverse impact statement coming out from Iran. So you can see that there is we have managed to balance our relations with both Iran and Saudi Arabia. Even Qatar, which is aligned with Turkey, has not actually come out against India, has not come out with any statement against India. So please understand, we have been fairly successful as far as our diplomacy in West Asia and North Africa is concerned. Most of the countries support us, they understand and appreciate the significance of India. And I think none of these countries would want to unnecessarily antagonize India because they know what the truth is. They know that India is a secular country. Our constitution mandates it. And I think Pakistani propaganda to whip up this sort of an emotion against India is not going to succeed.
Okay. As you may have already noticed, AK Pasha is no longer with us. The connection with him is lost. So I'm going to get quick closing comments from both my panelists with the best way forward in quick duration because we've got limited time on the program. Ambassador, starting first with you.
Yeah, number one is I would like to say and agree fully with Dr. Bansal that the West Asia policy, our activist policy as we call it, of Prime Minister Modi, I would say personally, has been the biggest success of this government. I mean, there is no doubt about it on any front that you take it. And that's what is shown both in terms of the outcomes and in terms of strategic collaboration that we have. Secondly, I would like to say that we have always hesitated of not playing, I would say, rather talking about the India's Islamic heritage. We have the second largest Muslim population in the world. And we have had the leaders or presidents, chief justices, the best actors and everything, So the kind of this thing we have, we must play it up so that the people are able to understand that when they are talking to India, they are also, especially the Middle Eastern countries or the OIC member countries, that who are they talking to? And the wrong kind of a message does not go. So I think it is time that we leverage what we have in our country as a part of the integral.
Okay, all right. And Captain Bansal, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
As I said, we have done fairly well as far as West Asia is concerned. And I think we need to ensure that whatever little propaganda on the social media is emanating against India in some of these countries, we must make our public diplomacy far more proactive to counter this. And I think Government of India should also make a concerted effort to interact with these countries and assuage any apprehensions that any of them may have, because countries like Pakistan and Turkey will not stop. They will continue their vicious agenda, they will continue their vicious propaganda, but we need to be firm and we need to continue with this good work that we are doing. And I'm sure the Islamic world by and large understands it. We have a large number of allies, very strong allies within the Islamic world. So I think they are there to guard and protect our interests. And we must express our gratitude to these countries which have thwarted this ulterior motives of Islamabad.
Okay, all right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that India needs to be watchful of what Pakistan does, and also with Turkey. For this point, at this point in time, we really need to watch out and be careful. There is a massive change that we witnessed in West Asia. West Asia has understood India's importance, and so has Malaysia, is what the panelists are suggesting. And we need to counter the social media propaganda actively and proactively going forward. That's the best way. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.